So this indictment means that every single newsroom around the world is essentially breaking the law. The solution is not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. And so that's why it's so important that everyone keeps fighting for Julian and for Julian's freedom.
He introduced the idea of scientific journalism. Bitcoin is the real Occupy Wall Street. He's in the worst prison in Britain. They call it Britain's Guantanamo Bay.
We're here at Amsterdam Bitcoin at the stand for Julian Assange, don't extradite Assange, and we're here with Gabriel Shipton, who has traveled over from Australia to be here, and Stella will talk at 3:15 in the main hall, and then afterwards there'll be a Q&A with Gabriel as well. Welcome, Gabriel. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. It's good to be here. It's amazing to see all the people here, all the sort of like-minded people at the Bitcoin conference. It's very good.
Well, you're welcoming me, but actually I should thank you because you invited us to be here and to represent Julian. A lot has happened in the last month and last days. Julian Assange has submitted his appeal, his perfected grounds for appeal, and we're waiting to get a verdict on that. I heard that you think it will be after the midterm elections that we can get some more information.
Yeah, that's right. So Julian submitted his perfected grounds of appeal. We are waiting now for the US to respond. I think they've probably got a few more weeks to respond to those, and then the High Court in the UK will decide whether to hear the appeal or not. And yeah, we expect that to happen after the midterm elections in the US because I don't think the US government wants this to be a big news story to affect any sort of news spin during the election period in the US. But this legal process is just a sort of thin veil that goes in front of Julian's persecution. It really isn't a legal process at all. It's a rat race that we're being threaded through, and the whole time Julian is in a maximum security prison. He's not serving a sentence. So effectively, what's happening to him during this court proceeding is what the people who are persecuting him want. So we try and not take the court dates a bit, they're decided by the persecutors in the end.
As a push to get him free or to not get him extradited, first of all, there was a big event last Saturday in London. It was an idea of a guy from New Zealand who originally planned to do a chain around Belmarsh prison. I think DA, don't extradite Assange, sort of planned it and then found out that wasn't doable, but the Houses of Parliament were. And so we were hoping that 5,000 people would be there, but in the end, about double of them arrived.
It was absolutely incredible. Matt is the guy's name from New Zealand. It blew everyone away. I think there was over 10,000 people there. There was a march in Australia that had, I think, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people, and like hundreds of people in Washington, D.C. as well. So it was a sort of global event, and I think it just really showed to everyone particularly in the UK, that a lot of people care about this, and it affects a lot of people. It's not just about Julian. It's about the people in the UK and their rights, their democratic rights to know what has been done in their name, particularly at sort of times of global turmoil like now. I think people are very, not confident in what the information they're getting from the press, from the media, and so I think Julian's fight is, really poignant at the moment for a lot of people in the UK, and it's not a niche issue anymore. But that's what we showed on the 8th, and that's what everyone's hard work over the years, all the activists have put in, that led to this huge turnout. Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget that we wouldn't have known about the torture in Guantanamo Bay if it hadn't been for Wikileaks. And we wouldn't have known about all the civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan if it weren't for Julian Assange and a lot more. And there's still a lot of files that haven't actually been explored that much. I know the Dutch files or Dutch things could be explored much. And so it's more than anything, it's for press freedom. It's everybody's press freedom. And I think people think, well, I'm not a publisher like Julian Assange is, and I don't publish government crime, so it won't affect me. But the problem is they are moving the goalposts the whole time. So whatever is not allowed is changing. And I heard Stella say that in the charges against him under the Espionage Act, it now means that if you even read something that it was published by somebody else that was top secret or whatever, that you as well can be persecuted. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's possessing, publishing. So essentially every news organization has classified material. You know, that's what they deal in. So this indictment means that every single newsroom around the world is essentially breaking the law, and that everyday journalism, investigative journalism, is illegal. And that not only affects journalists, but also affects, you know, it goes to the root of our democracy, right? Like, how are we supposed to elect a government if we don't know what they're doing? You know, if we are unaware, if we are ignorant, how can we make informed decisions to make our lives better? And I think that was really what's so important about Wikileaks and why Wikileaks had such a huge impact, because, you know, in places, you know, like in Mexico and Latin America, it's changed people's lives. People have been able to make decisions now knowing that the governments they elect are working for them and not working for this oligarchy or the State Department or things like that. So I think, you know, when you see the effect in these countries that has had on normal people, the WikiLeaks publications, it's really moving. And that's why these people who are in power are so afraid of what Julian created, because they've been able to do this with impunity for so long, and now their sort of mandate, their hegemony is falling away because the veil has been lifted from them. Yeah.
But I think Stella or somebody also mentioned that even if you were sharing a classified document on Facebook, yes. I mean, then you're, and I just want to stress this because people think it's far away from them. It only affects journalists, or it only affects, you know, people who are as genius like Julian. But it will eventually, when this precedent is set, it will affect all of us.
Yes, yeah, well, I think it affects the very essence, like I said, the essence of our society. And like I said, if we don't know what's going on, you know, do we really live in democracies? You know, like, and I don't think we do. And I think a lot of people think that, oh, you know, we know what's, you know, we're getting good reportage and all this sort of stuff, but this really affects that. And so that's why I think you're seeing, you know, these Western democracies are starting to sort of become less and less confident and more barbaric. It's this, Julian's case is emblematic of that. It's emblematic of this descent into barbarity that we're seeing in Western democracies. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the statement, like, we are all Assange, at first to me it was like a sort of a hypothetical statement, but it's becoming real reality at the moment. And Stella said at a certain point that this organization, this idea of the human chain, all these people coming together, that it really energized Julian. But then on Monday, after the announcement that people would go to Hyde Park Corner, they said that he tested positive for COVID and that he's now 24 hours back again in isolation. Do you think that has anything to do with each other, that he was getting too energized, maybe?
Look, I mean, you know, we're always on the lookout for things like that. You know, if you just look at the persecution of Julian, it's full of these sorts of things. So we're always wary of that going on. You know, yeah, like you said, he's in his cell 24 hours a day at the moment. Who knows for how long. But yeah, we are always on the lookout for things like that. There's constant abusive process in Julian's case. And yeah, we're very much aware that these sorts of things can be used to persecute people or put them in, torture them. So yeah, we're definitely on the lookout for stuff like that.
And I saw that Jennifer Robinson was at the Human Chain as well. That's her name, right? Yeah. Do they now have more access to Julian? I mean, before he was locked up 24 hours, did they? Because during his court cases, it was terrible, I heard. But did it get better?
Yeah, I think, it's a sort of too little, too late sort of scenario. It's not like Julian can go back and have another go at the magistrate's level. So it has gotten better, but like I said, there's been constant abusive process, and Julian's rights have been trodden on at every single stage of the process, and it's what I know. It's bad, but it's what we've come to expect, and so I think everything. These people will go to any length to keep Julian in prison. To make an example of him. If you do this, you have no rights. You have no rights to due process. You have no rights of asylum. You have no rights of speech. You have no human rights. And that is the intention, to set this example, to show everyone what's happening. So that's how I see it, and that's what I think is going on now.
And just as a last sort of question, how is his personal situation? I mean, literally, he had a laptop that he couldn't type on. You said the other day that was still the same, that didn't change. Because when he just came into prison, he had no access to anything, nothing, no books, no library. Has that loosened up? Is his life in the prison a little bit better than it was the first year, so to say?
Yeah, it has gotten better. And, funnily, or not funnily, but, it wasn't the political representations, the representations from his lawyers. What changed his prison conditions in those days back in 2019 was petitions from the prisoners. So all these political representations, like politicians going to see him, lawyers writing letters, all this sort of stuff, it didn't change his situation, and it was just the three petitions from the prisoners that got him out of that situation where he was in the health wing, in his cell, in total isolation. And I think that's a really good sign for all the grassroots people around the world who are involved in this movement. It's not going to come. The solution is not going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. And so that's why it's so important that everyone keeps fighting for Julian and for Julian's freedom.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for this interview. And good luck.
Thanks. Thank you.
He's seen violent prisoners come and go, serve their sentences and be released. But Julian is just there, indefinitely it seems. What's being done to Julian is not a legitimate use of the legal system. It is bending the rules. It is corrupting the rules in order to keep him there. And in so doing, it is corrupting the whole system. It's not a legitimate legal process. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there about what, not just Julian, but anyone that challenges the hegemonic order with innovation is up against at that level. I know it sounds kind of depressing right now, but I don't want to depress you all, because in the fight that we've been engaged in over the past 12 years now, since Wikileaks published these publications for which he's now facing 175 years. And those publications are about war, about civilian killings, about war crimes in Iraq, Afghanistan, about torture in Guantanamo Bay, about the gravest possible crimes that a state can engage in, and the subsequent cover-up of those crimes. So we've been fighting back. And we've been fighting back saying, well, the criminals here are actually the US personnel who killed 15,000 civilians in Iraq, who gunned down 2 Reuters journalists and 12 other civilians in the streets of Baghdad in a war crime that is documented in a very famous Wikileaks video called Collateral Murder. But not just that. Wikileaks hasn't just revealed past crimes committed by the US in those wars. It's also, through the fight back for Julian's freedom, we've been able to find out a lot more about the criminality that has been involved in getting Julian into prison. When Julian was first arrested on the 11th of April 2019, you may remember he had spent 7 years inside the Ecuadorian embassy, and he was kept in a legal limbo. He was not charged for the first 9 years from 2010 to 2019. Yet, the UK said if he stepped out of that embassy, they would arrest him. And if you read the mainstream media and you believed them, you would think, oh, well, the US doesn't want him, he's just paranoid. But now everyone knows that's not true. When he stepped out of the embassy, he didn't step out, he was dragged out. Ecuador was basically sold him out for about $10 billion in loans. And he was dragged out of the embassy by British police. And the moment he was dragged out, the police revealed that the US wanted to extradite him. And that was a major shift in the narrative for many of the journalists who had believed their own propaganda. Because there had been an almighty propaganda war against Julian to pave the way and create the political environment in which it was acceptable to put Julian in prison. And that is something that was many years coming. And in the lead up to his arrest, it was relentless. The amount of propaganda and planting of stories in CNN, even in The Guardian, that published a front page entirely fabricated story that everyone knows is fabricated. Washington Post even wrote articles about how could The Guardian get this so wrong. And I'll tell you how. They basically lost all standards because Julian became a target. He was arrested, but then things started changing. At the moment of his arrest, 2 of the people who had been involved in an illegal operation against Julian inside the embassy became whistleblowers. They went to the press, they went to the Spanish police. They had been inside the embassy working as security guards, but what they had actually been doing was working for the CIA. They've been recording Julian's conversations with his lawyers. They had been instructed to steal the DNA from our baby's nappy. They had followed me. And they had even discussed plans to kidnap and poison Julian from the embassy. And they went to the police and they said, we've been engaged in this behavior and these operations, and we want to become whistleblowers. And from that, we now have evidence of the illegal activities that the United States was engaging in inside that embassy. There's a court case coming up, a criminal action against the security firm that was recording Julian's legal conversations and engaging in all this illegality. when do you ever get to see this kind of rampant criminality committed by a state? Well, in this case, because we're fighting back. The very case against Julian is also of relevance to the Bitcoin community, because what the United States has done has bent the rules on sovereignty and jurisdiction. The Espionage Act is being applied to an Australian citizen in England. Julian has nothing to do with the United States other than publish evidence of wrongdoing by the United States. And the UK is going along with it. Imagine that. It's reaching into the jurisdiction of a foreign country and saying, well, because that information is ours, we're going to pluck this foreign national from the UK and place him in a US high security prison for 175 years. It's no coincidence that they've chosen Virginia, the Eastern District of Virginia, as the place to put Julian on trial for the Espionage Act. Why? Well, that's where all the big national security agencies and their contractors and so on are based. And the jury pool is what you might expect from the Eastern District of Virginia. Julian cannot mount a public interest defense under the Espionage Act. He cannot say, well, I published evidence of 15,000 civilians killed by the US military. I published evidence of this war crime which is captured in the collateral murder video. I published because it was in the public interest. I published and I won dozens of journalism prizes and human rights prizes because of these very publications. He cannot argue that. And that is why the extradition of Julian is a travesty of justice. Just a few months ago, there was an investigative piece published by 3 national security journalists in Washington, D.C. And these guys, no one can say that they're, Julian fans or anything like that. They're national security journalists based in D.C. And they wrote up an incredible investigation about what the CIA was up to under Mike Pompeo. And we had seen the kind of implementation, the operation of what they were up to through these Spanish whistleblowers and the material that has been seized through raids by the Spanish police and which is coming out in the court case in Spain. But this is the planning part of it. Over 30 sources, that's 30, over 30 sources, named and unnamed, from the CIA, from the National Security Council in the United States, spoke to these journalists because what was being planned was so outrageous and so out there that even within the administration there was a rejection of it. And they said that Mike Pompeo was completely obsessed with Wikileaks and that he had asked for sketches and options about how to assassinate him. They had also discussed kidnapping him from the embassy, taking him to a black site, and it was in that context that the US finally brought a charge. Because they were planning this when they couldn't even think of how to charge him. Because they've charged him with the act of journalism, receiving information from a source, possessing information, and communicating it to the public. They've made that a crime. Obama had announced during his administration, and Obama, as you know, commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. Chelsea Manning was the source of this material. Obama's Department of Justice, through its spokesperson, Matthew Miller, said, "This administration is not going to charge Julian Assange over the publications from Chelsea Manning." And the reason is this: Julian Assange is a publisher, he's not a hacker. And there is no way to go after Julian Assange which does not set a precedent for the rest of the press. And this administration is not prepared to do that. Well, the next administration was, and is, and did it precisely for that reason. So that is now where we stand. I always kind of tease Julian a bit because I say, you know, you're about 7 to 10 years ahead of your time. Back in 2012, he published a book called Cypherpunks, Freedom and the Future of the Internet. It was 2012, and he was getting reviews from places like The Guardian. And basically that lays out the surveillance architecture of the internet and how our freedom was about to be lost. He's famously said, "This is the last free generation." He said that a few years back. A few months later, Snowden revealed what he revealed. And what Julian had published 6 months prior was then exposed in detail. It's no coincidence that Bitcoin came of age around the same time that Wikileaks did as well. And you might think, oh, well, this was a time of internet utopia and the internet was free back then, and people really felt there was a huge potential of freedom of exchange and cooperation and so on. And I think in a way that's true, but it's a bit of a naive understanding. I think those working on Bitcoin and Julian and some projects like that, but those are probably the two most impactful. They knew that we are living with borrowed time. They understood how things are going to converge and how the coercive capacities of states and of corporations to control information, control the architecture, is just a matter of time. And that's why we all have to fight back. Because Julian's freedom is connected not just to the future of Bitcoin and the potential of Bitcoin and so on, but it goes far deeper than that. Julian's freedom is connected to all our freedoms. So join our fight because it's also your fight to free Julian. We need Julian. You need Julian because he also has an incredible foresight and ability to understand this big picture, which I think we all need. So I'm here. Julian's brother Gabriel is also here somewhere. There he is in the front row. And, I have open DMs on Twitter. I'm very happy for people to come up and speak to me, talk about your ideas. Above all, please help us fight, because Julian can win this, and we all win if Julian is free. Thank you.
Het gaat hier vandaag over saamhorigheid.
Dagje zonder hemel.
Rustig, lieg niet. Normaal maken is wat niet normaal.
Every nation
blauwe
in every region now has a decision to make. En dan ook geen helm meer.
You think I'm joking? Predator
Dat
drones.
is best makkelijk.
You will never see it coming.
Wat dacht je, alle mensen
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.
bezig met vandaag.